The sun drops behind the limestone crags of the Judean wilderness. The temperature falls 20 degrees in a matter of minutes, and the wind begins to bite. We have domesticated the shepherd. We have turned an occupation of blood, sweat, and constant danger into a mascot for a greeting card. The final line of Ezekiel 34, verse 16, holds a terrifying promise that modern readers almost always edit out. After promising to save the weak, God turns his eyes to the oppressors. But the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd them with justice. The shepherd does not just comfort the wounded. He breaks the jaw of the abuser. He is a protector who brings radical healing to the fragile and absolute devastation to the predators who fed on them. This is the ancient, bloody, unyielding reality of the shepherd of Israel. He is a sovereign warrior who fights in the dark. But if you walk into a typical modern congregation, you will not find this warrior anywhere. Look at the version of God you have been taught to expect. If you grew up sitting in climate-controlled rooms, under the hum of fluorescent lights, singing soft acoustic songs while looking at polished screens, you have likely inherited a domesticated theology. You have been handed a shepherd who acts more like a suburban life coach than a sovereign king. When your life fractures, when the medical report comes back heavy, when the bank account drains into red ink, when the silence in your house becomes a physical weight pressing against your ribs, you are taught to close your eyes. In the modern mind, a shepherd is basically a historical pet sitter, someone who wanders around beautiful meadows, making sure the animals do not wander off. And picture a serene, soft-spoken figure standing in the tall grass. You are told to simply accept that this gentle caretaker is watching over you, even as the predators tear through the walls of your life. But that image is functionally useless when the wolves actually breach the perimeter. A pet sitter cannot save you from the fangs. A life coach cannot break the jaw of the enemy at your throat. This sanitized, passive version of God is not the shepherd of Israel. It is a projection of our modern obsession with safety. We have stripped the roe of his iron-studded club because the idea of a militant, unyielding sovereign makes us uncomfortable. We want the green pastures. But we do not want the bleeding hands of the warrior who had to kill a lion to secure that pasture. We want the still waters. But we forget that the shepherd had to map every hidden ravine and poison spring to lead the flock there safely. We want the table prepared before us. But we ignore the fact that it is set in the literal presence of our enemies, while a battle rages just beyond the glow of the firelight. If you are in a season where everything feels like it is collapsing, the gentle mascot on the Sunday school wall will not hold your weight. You do not need a God who merely watches you suffer with sympathetic eyes. But in the world of the biblical authors, the wilderness was not a petting zoo. It was a war zone. Lions, bears, wolves, raiders. You need the ancient, sovereign roe who steps into the mud of your valley, pulls out a weapon, and tells the darkness to back away from his property. You need the fierce, protective authority of a king who refuses to lose what belongs to him. Because when the shepherd of Israel finally stepped into human history in the flesh, he did not come to play a flute in the meadow. He came to do something unprecedented with the wolves. The detail that changes everything happens in the stone courts of Jerusalem. It is winter. The cold wind cuts through the heavy pillars of Solomon's colonnade. The air smells of burning lamp oil and the metallic tang of altar blood. The religious elite circle Jesus. They demand a clear answer. They are gripping jagged stones in the folds of their cloaks, ready to crush his skull. He does not retreat. He does not soften his voice. He reaches back to the deathbed of Jacob. He reaches back to the ashes of Asaph. He reaches back to the fury of Ezekiel 34. I am the good shepherd. E declares. In English, good sounds mild. It sounds polite. But the Greek word Jesus uses is kalos. It means noble. It means heroic. It is the kind of goodness that wins battles and dies with honor. A shepherd in ancient Palestine was part survivalist, part combatant, and part sovereign of a micro-kingdom. When a flock survived the season, it was not because And Jesus immediately proves it by defining exactly what a callous shepherd does when the shadows move. He points to the hired hand. The hired hand sees the wolf. The hired hand drops his staff. The hired hand runs away. The wolf attacks. The flock scatters. Why? Because the hired hand does not own the sheep. When the fangs bare in the dark, he calculates the cost. He decides his own blood is worth more than the flock. But the roe stays. The roe stands his ground. The roe steps directly between the predator and the prey. Jesus looks at the men holding the stones. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. We usually read this as a passive surrender. We picture Jesus sadly bowing his head to fate. But look at the Greek verb he uses. Tithemi. It means to place, to set down, to wager. It is a deliberate, sovereign action. No one takes it from me. He says, I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This completely rewrites the narrative of the cross. The crucifixion is not a tragedy of Roman politics. It is the lethal strike of a sovereign king. He is drawing the ultimate predator out of the dark. He is letting death sink its teeth into his own flesh. The shepherd was gentle. It was because the shepherd was lethal to anything that threatened what belonged to him. So when the ancient Israelites looked up at, so he can break the jaw of the wolf from the inside out, he takes the hit. He absorbs the violence. He exhausts the threat. The shepherd dies so the flock can walk out of the slaughterhouse alive. And that single, heroic act unlocks the most famous poem in human history. When you understand the violent, protective nature of the ancient shepherd, it completely rewrites how you read the most famous poem in human history. We read Psalm 23 at funerals. We print it on delicate floral bookmarks. We recite it in hushed tones, surrounded by lilies and soft organ music, and we turn David's ancient words into a polite lullaby about the afterlife. It is not a lullaby. It is a psychological survival manual for the present. Look at the geography David is describing. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The Hebrew word he uses for that valley is Salmavet. It translates to deep darkness, or the shadow of death. In the topography of ancient Judea, this was not a metaphor. It was a literal place. There are deep, narrow limestone ravines carved into the wilderness, where the walls are so steep that the sun barely reaches the floor. The shadows are long. The footing is treacherous. And those ravines are exactly where the predators wait in ambush. The sky, and called God their shepherd. They were not asking for a hug. They were asking for a champion. This misconception changes how we read. When you walk into a place like that, the human body reacts. The chest tightens. The breath becomes shallow. The cold sweat of panic begins to form on the back of your neck. But David says his psychology remains completely intact. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Why is he not afraid? He tells us in the very next breath, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. For generations, we have read that word comfort and imagined a warm blanket. But look at the instruments providing the comfort. The staff, the mishnah, is the long crook used to guide and rescue the sheep. But the rod, the shevet, is the heavy piece of wood studded with iron that we saw at the very beginning of this journey. The rod is not a walking stick for a weary traveler. It is a weapon of blunt force trauma designed to crush the skull of a wolf. The comfort David is experiencing in the darkest ravine of his life is not the comfort of a soft pillow. It is the comfort of walking next to a heavily armed warrior. His psychology remains intact, not because the valley is safe, but because the shepherd is dangerous. The anxiety dissipates because he can hear the heavy thud of that iron-studded club tapping against the stone. Nearly a third of the Bible. It softens the edges of the Psalms. It neuters the warnings of the prophets. And it completely obscures the breathtaking claim. As they walk through the dark, he knows that whatever is waiting in the shadows has to get through the row first. And that brings us to the ultimate question. What happens when you trace this single, blood-stained thread from Jacob's deathbed through the burning of Israel, into the darkest valleys of the Psalms, and all the way to an empty tomb? A dying patriarch looked at his son's arrow-riddled life and named a warrior Rock, who broke the hostility. A weeping poet watched his nation burn and cried out to a sovereign king to draw his sword. A priest sat in the mud of exile and heard God fire the human rulers to take his kingdom back. A king walked through a black limestone ravine and found his panic broken by the sound of an iron club. A savior stood in a stone courtyard surrounded by killers and declared himself the hero who refuses to run. The same savior walked into the teeth of the ultimate predator and let death bite his own flesh to break its jaw from the inside. And an empty tomb proved the wager was won, and the flock walked out of the slaughterhouse alive. Same title, same God. Jesus was making when he stood in the temple courts and declared that he was the good shepherd. Most people assume calling God a shepherd is but here is the part I keep coming back to. The sound of that heavy wood tapping against the limestone. In the dark. We spend so much of our lives begging God to turn the valley into a meadow. We ask him to flatten the ravines and remove the shadows completely. But the road does not erase the valley. He steps into the ravine with us, fully armed. If you are in a season where the predators are circling, where the shadows in your life feel heavy and literal, stop looking for a passive pet sitter in the grass. Look for the warrior. The shepherd does not panic when the wolves breach your perimeter. He does not negotiate with the things trying to tear you apart. He steps directly between you and the fangs. And may the God who has never once surrendered a single sheep to the dark walk with you through your deepest ravine and bring you out carrying a peace you could not have received any other way. Poetic way to describe his tenderness. It is not a metaphor about tenderness. It is a declaration of sovereign violence. To feel the weight of this story, we cannot start in the New Testament. We cannot even start with David writing Psalm 23 inches, the fields of Bethlehem. The trail begins centuries earlier. A man stands at the mouth of a narrow stone enclosure, holding a heavy wooden rod studded with iron nails. His hands are calloused, in a room in Egypt, where a dying patriarch is reaching for a word that had never been used this way before. When you track a theological theme through the ancient Hebrew scrolls, the law of first mention acts like a compass. The first time a specific word or title is used, it sets the DNA for every chapter that follows. It anchors the concept. If you want to understand what the biblical authors actually meant when they called God a shepherd, you have to look at where the title was born. And it does not begin in a peaceful meadow. It begins in a foreign palace, in the middle of a deathbed prophecy. If you read the first 48 chapters of the book of Genesis, God is called many things. He is Elohim, the creator who speaks light into the primordial dark. He is El Shaddai, the Almighty who makes impossible covenants. He is the shield of Abraham. He is the fear of Isaac. But he is never once called a shepherd. The text of Genesis 49 places us in Egypt. Jacob, the last of the great founding patriarchs, is dying. He is lying on fine Egyptian linen, his breathing shallow. The heavy, humid air of the Nile Delta pressing into the room. He has gathered his 12 sons around his bed. His tunic smells of wood smoke, dust, and crushed thyme. He is not looking at the flock resting behind him, to speak final words over them. When he turns his failing eyes toward Joseph, the poetry of the text shifts. Joseph is the son who was betrayed by his own blood, sold into foreign slavery, and left for dead in a pit, only to rise, to become the second most powerful man in the known world. Jacob recounts the bitter trauma of his son's life. He speaks of the enemies who hunted Joseph. The archers attacked him. Jacob whispers, they shot at him with hostility. And then, Jacob credits the source of Joseph's impossible survival. He declares that Joseph's bow remained steady, and his arms were made strong, by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. In the Hebrew text, the juxtaposition is entirely deliberate. The word shepherd is bracketed by two of the hardest, most unyielding images in the ancient language. The mighty one is a military term, often associated with a champion who steps out to fight on behalf of a weaker army. The rock is an image of impenetrable defense, a fortress where arrows simply shatter against the stone. The shepherd is not a symbol of tranquility. It is a title of military defense. You have to remember who is speaking. Jacob was an actual, historical shepherd. He is staring into the dark, listening to the dry brush rustling just beyond the firelight. He is hunting the thing that is hunting his sheep. He had spent decades managing flocks in the unforgiving terrain of the ancient Near East. He knew the frost biting his hands at midnight. He knew the sudden terror of the wolves. He knew the smell of animal blood on his own tunic after fighting off a predator, with nothing but a heavy wooden club. When Jacob looks back at his son's brutal, arrow-riddled life and calls God a shepherd, he is speaking from professional experience. He knows exactly what the job requires. But Jacob eventually stops breathing. The 12 sons leave that Egyptian room. The family becomes a nation. And that nation spends the next several centuries being hunted and torn apart by the empires of the ancient world. But hundreds of years later, in the middle of a catastrophic national collapse, a poet remembers Jacob's deathbed revelation. He pulls this exact title out of the dark, and he attaches a desperate, terrifying question to it. Smoke chokes the northern horizon. The gates fall. The iron wheels of chariots grind over stone and bone. Assyria is here. We are in the 8th century BC. The northern kingdom of Israel is collapsing. It is being violently, systematically erased by the most brutal military machine the ancient world has ever seen. Most of us have seen the paintings. The stained glass windows in quiet churches. The Sunday school illustrations. The Assyrians do not just conquer cities. They flay their captives alive. They salt the agricultural terraces. They leave pyramids of human skulls outside the city gates. The air is thick with the copper scent of blood and the heavy soot of burning timber. A man named Asaph watches the slaughter of his generation. He can smell the burning cedar. He can taste the ash coating the back of his throat. He looks out over a nation that has been completely devoured by wolves. He picks up a pen. He writes a song. We know it as Psalm 80. Hear us, Shepherd of Israel. You who lead Joseph like a flock. You who sit enthroned between the cherubim, shine forth. Psalm 80 is not a polite piece of temple liturgy. It is a distress flare fired into a black sky. Asaph is staring at a national massacre, and he reaches for the exact same title Jacob used on his deathbed, Shepherd of Israel. But Asaph adds a devastating visual to the prayer. He describes Israel as a vineyard that God himself planted. But the defenses are gone. The protective stone walls are broken down. Every passerby plucks the grapes. The wild boar from the forest tears at the roots. The beasts of the field feed on the vines. The tusks rip the bark. The fire consumes the branches of a European Jesus sitting on perfectly green grass, cradling a fluffy, snow-white lamb against his spotless robe. The image is safe. It is domestic. The flock is being torn apart by predators. And the shepherd seems to be missing. Asaph is begging the shepherd to wake up. He is begging him to step out of the silence, pick up his iron-studded club, and crack the skull of the Assyrian boar. Awaken your might. Asaph writes, Come and save us. He asks 3 times in the same psalm for God to make his face shine, so they can be saved. He wants the shepherd to step between the flock and the fangs in the dark. He wants the warrior Jacob promised. He wants the mighty one to show up on the battlefield. But here is what most people miss. When you read this psalm in English, the title feels like a simple, static noun. You see the word shepherd, and your modern brain automatically defaults to the guy with the flute in the peaceful meadow. You miss the raw, authoritative power vibrating underneath the text. To hear what Asaph actually cried out as his world burned, you have to strip away the English translation. You have to look at the original Hebrew word hiding in the very first verse. The opening verse of Psalm 80 gives us the English phrase, Shepherd of Israel. But when you look at the ink Asaph actually laid on the parchment, it is designed to make us feel calm when the world is chaotic. And it does carry a piece of the truth. God does gather the broken. The word translated as shepherd is the Hebrew ro. It comes from the root verb ra'ah, which literally means to pasture or to tend a flock. But in the ancient Near East, Language was intrinsically tied to power, and this specific word carried massive political weight. In the vocabulary of ancient Babylon, Assyria, and Egypt, the shepherd was not a peasant hiding in the hills. The shepherd was the absolute, sovereign ruler. You can see it carved into the cold obsidian of Hammurabi's stele, where the Babylonian king calls himself the shepherd of his people. You can see it in the smooth gold of the shepherd's crook, resting across the chest of a mummified pharaoh in the Valley of the Kings. To be a Ro in the ancient world was to possess the authority of life and death over a nation. You see this exact royal overlap in the historical texts of the Old Testament. When the tribes of Israel finally come to Hebron in 2 Samuel chapter 5 to crown David, they do not just hand him a piece of jewelry. They quote God's sovereign decree over him: "You shall shepherd my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel." The language of the pasture and the language of the throne room were completely interchangeable. King and shepherd were the exact same concept. That ancient political reality changes everything about Asaph's desperate prayer. But if you trace the actual origins of this image, if you look at the dirt and the blood of the ancient Near East, and if you follow, when he cries out to the Ro Yisrael from the ashes of a burning nation, he is not asking for agricultural comfort. He is calling on the commander-in-chief. He is invoking an ancient treaty. He wants the sovereign ruler to draw his sword, step into the mud, and defend the borders of his kingdom. The shepherd is not a metaphor for gentle companionship. It is a title of absolute, militant kingship. If seeing the ancient political weight behind these verses is shifting how you read the text, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the language than you knew was possible. So the later prophets take this royal title and they turn it into a weapon. Hundreds of years after Asaph, another man sits in exile, watching the human leaders of Israel absolutely fail to protect the people they were entrusted with. And he delivers a message from the ultimate Ro that still burns coming off the page. The wind blowing off the Kebar River in Babylon is thick. It carries the smell of stagnant mud, crushed reeds, and the heavy musk of foreign incense. A priest named Ezekiel sits among the exiles. The year is roughly 586 BC. Jerusalem has just been burned to bedrock. The temple is ash. One specific phrase that echoes through the most desperate moments of Israel's history, you start to see something the paintings completely miss. The people are captives, stumbling through the dust of a strange empire, and the word of the Lord comes to Ezekiel like a hammer against stone. Ezekiel, chapter 34, is a divine court-martial. God looks at the kings, the priests, and the politicians of Israel, the men entrusted with the royal title of Roe, and he unleashes absolute fury. He indicts them for feeding on the sheep instead of feeding the flock. You eat the fat, you wear the wool. You slaughter the strong. The rhythmic accusation echoes across the text. The weak were not strengthened. The sick were not healed. The fractured bones were not bound up. The scattered were not brought back. The flock was driven with force and cruelty, left to become meat for every predator hunting in the dark mountains. God's response is not a reprimand. It is a divine eviction. He fires the kings of Israel. He strips the title of Ro from human hands and declares that he is stepping onto the battlefield himself to take his kingdom back. Watch the lyrical cadence of the text as God takes command. I myself will search for my sheep. I myself will rescue them from the places they were scattered on a day of clouds and thick darkness. I will bring them out. I will feed them on the mountains. I will bind up the injured. It is a breathtaking promise of salvation. But God does not stop there.